Tira Bivast, thank you so much for plucking me all the way from London and flying me to sunny Estonia to share my story. I'd like to share a story about 6 businesses that I've been involved in. Clicker works. Let's try it again. 6 of the businesses that I've started and some of the things I've learned along the way. Now, before I start, what I'd like to do is share with you what we all know to be true about entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs are naturally self-confident. Entrepreneurs never listen to naysayers. They're experienced in the industry they're operating in. They're the ones with the really great ideas, and they're the ones with the know-how. Entrepreneurs are wise enough to start businesses in booming markets, not in recessed ones. And as we all know, entrepreneurs are risk takers. Well, what if I was to tell you that I think that every single one of those received wisdoms is a myth? And the reason I'm starting with that is I just think it's so true that we all start with nothing. I would say that every single business that I've started with nothing except for an idea. And I think that every single one of us has exactly, I genuinely think this, has exactly what they need in order to make a success. You don't need anything else than what you've got. And to have a mindset which I think we all naturally tend towards, about feeling that we need to be in some way different or to have some other kind of better experiences or experience in business in order to succeed, I think holds us back. And I think there's a far more valuable and powerful set of beliefs to install, and I'd like to do my little bit to help us all along the journey. So, my first business, this is the best photograph I could find. These are, in Britain they're called flapjacks, so they're little oat cakes. Now, I started this business whilst I was still at university, and up until then I'd lived at home. And I suddenly went away to university, and in the summer holidays, it suddenly dawned on me for the first time 2 things. One is I had a 5-month gap to fill during the summer holidays, and secondly, I had to earn my way. And it was kind of quite a new kind of worry and experience. And I was bemoaning this to my friend Ben at his house over a flapjack, trying to work out what I could do. And it somehow just didn't occur to me for some strange reason. It didn't occur to me to get some kind of temporary job. And the flapjack I was eating was magnificent. I'd eaten loads of them, and it was his mum's recipe. In fact, everybody I knew thought those flapjacks were fantastic. And I suddenly had an idea, and I thought, well, look, if I can eat 6 flapjacks a day, surely we can make them and sell them to other people. And he said, well, I don't know, why not? Let's give it a go. So we got his mum's recipe and got out a big pot and started making them. And by the end of the day, we had a great big pile of flapjacks. And the ones we didn't eat, we decided we were going to go off and sell. And so the next morning we got together again, and we put these flapjacks into a container. There you go, a Tupperware box. Rather sort of shy and nervous and wondering what to do next. And so we wandered down the high street and found a sandwich bar. In fact, probably, if I remember, there were probably 2 sandwich bars that we were a bit frightened to go into because the bloke looked a bit frightening. So we kind of went to the 3rd sandwich bar and stood in the queue behind all the other people, feeling a bit nervous and awkward with our little Tupperware box. And when we got to the person who was, owned the sandwich bar, he was appalled. I mean, he didn't want to get a pitch from us about buying these ridiculous flapjacks in a Tupperware box, because there's a whole queue of people behind us wanted to buy sandwiches, and that's what he was interested in. So it was a bit frightening, and we were sort of a bit put off, and we tried it a couple more times, and we thought, oh dear, this is really not going to work. So we went home and had a cup of tea and a flapjack. And tried to kind of work out what we were doing wrong, and we told our mums, how we got on, and they were totally appalled that we had our flapjacks in this little kind of Tupperware box, and they gave us my first business asset, a wicker basket and with a nice gingham cloth. And we kind of felt a bit more confident. The next day we went back into different sandwich bars this time. We'd ruined our chances with the first lot. And this time, of course, we were far more professional because we had country fresh, gorgeous flapjacks. And lo and behold, and also, by the way, we got up really early as students. I mean, we were already at the sandwich bar at 10 o'clock in the morning. and before the lunchtime crowd started, and we just seemed more credible. And we had, actually, the thing most importantly, we had what I think still are the world's best flapjacks. I have since tasted an unbelievable amount of flapjacks, and I genuinely don't think I've tasted a flapjack as good as the ones we made. And lo and behold, we got better and better at selling them, and we started developing our pitch. And eventually, we had what I think is a really powerful pitch. And we said to new sandwich bar owners, look, we deliver every week. And this time next week, we'll be back. What we'd like to do, we'd like to give you a dozen flapjacks. Now, when we come back next week, if you like them, if you sold them or whatever, you can pay us for those flapjacks next week. And if for whatever reason, you haven't sold them, or you liked them, but you didn't sell them, you ate them yourself, whatever, don't pay us for these flapjacks. So the worst thing that can happen to you is you get a dozen of these delicious flapjacks free of charge. And in Britain, there's an expression which is no-brainer. I mean, it was just a simple thing to agree to do. And lo and behold, more and more people said, well, okay, why not? And then we realized we were getting rather busy, and we knew somebody who was just a sort of a small business person, but she distributed cakes. And so she took on our flapjacks. Now, by the end of that summer holidays, I never counted, but I guess we probably made something like 20 or 25,000 flapjacks. And we'd started 3 new lines of cake, so we had 4 cakes. We had a little brand called Mrs. Shaw's Home Bake. And when we look back on that experience, in fact, our cakes were selling from Brighton all the way up to Birmingham, which is probably about the bottom third of the UK. So what happened to me is I wasn't naturally self-confident. And in fact, I think it's a myth that you need to be self-confident to start in business. I think the really, really important thing is you need to be confident about the thing that you're doing, the product. We went back to the sandwich bar the next day, not because somehow we felt that we knew what we were doing, but because when we went back to have our tea and flapjack, we just thought this is so delicious that if we get it right, people really will want to buy and eat our flapjacks. So our confidence was in the thing we were doing, and we just happened to be the people who were the shepherds. So we kind of took the steps. And bit by bit, I think that confidence rubs up on you. But what I really hope is that nobody thinks somehow they need to be really confident in themselves to push forward, because that, I don't think, is where the confidence lies. Now, my next business, well, not next, actually, wind the clock forward 20 years. The next one I want to talk about, and the next myth I want to bust, is that good entrepreneurs come up with their brilliant ideas and have the know-how. Well, in my experience, that's not been true. I've been involved in or started probably about 10 businesses, and it's almost never the case I've come up with the idea. What happens with me is I just get, like networking we just talked about, there are lots of amazingly brilliant individuals who come up with really interesting, imaginative ideas. And I get inspired by those ideas. And some of them are just exciting, and some of them really look like they've got potential. And I get enthused, and I want to do my bit to make that work. So my version of entrepreneuring is nothing to do with coming up with the ideas myself, but just doing one thing, which is spotting a brilliant idea and then doing what it takes to make it happen, and surrounding myself with the people who are going to help me do that. So this particular idea actually was my father's idea. My father is a playwright and film director, and he had a brilliant idea, which was to tell the story of Venice to the tourists who arrive in Venice. Each year there are something like 10 million tourists who arrive in Venice, and what's more, they renew themselves every 3 days, and they come there because they're interested in Venice, so why not tell them a story? And to do it in a really new and interesting way, which is to which is to have live actors stepping into some of the famous paintings of Venice's past, and then to project those paintings around the walls and the ceiling, and actually to have live video sequences as well, which the actors interact with, so that you can have a very few actors, and then you can actually put a lot of money into the production values, so that you can keep your costs really low and have a fantastic live experience every time you go and see this show. Now, I thought it was a really brilliant idea, and I thought it needed to happen, so I started a business with my father doing this. Let me just grab some water. There were some problems. I'd never run an entertainment business before. I'd never run a tourism business before. I'd never run a business outside the UK, let alone in Italy, which has got its own ecosystem. And I'd never raised money before. And we reckoned that we'd probably need to raise €2 million in order to get this business going. So I had all these obstacles. But the thing I had was just like the flapjacks. I was just so confident about the product itself that it was going to work that I made myself responsible for doing what it would take to get the business started. And I moved over that threshold from having an interest in to really, really doing what it would take. And the moment that happens, things show up. What showed up was it turned out that he actually knew a producer who'd worked in Italy. And that producer actually knew 2 Italians who knew tourism. So as this was all manifesting, we got together as 5 people, and we spent probably about a year trying to work out how this whole thing was going to work and going to look for venues in Venice. And we found a venue which was 50 metres from the heart of the tourism Venice, which is St. Mark's Square. And then my father just happened to go to a networking event, which was an old school reunion, met a new person, just happened to be somebody who specialised in raising money for entertainment ventures. So the next day I was in his office, we got on really well. I probably spent the next month learning at his feet everything I needed to know about raising money in an arts venture and how I put together this kind of proposal. And he also introduced me to a number of investors, and that started the ball rolling. And in the end, we did through many twists and turns and a whole story around how this happened. And it was actually a pretty intense period of my life. But it took about 9 months to do, and it culminated almost when the whole thing fell over and actually required my father to go to Venice 5 hours before the deadline. This whole thing was going to be off for a reason I won't explain, with a suitcase full of his pension money, which was fortunately, because we just managed to pull all the investors together at the same time, all the cash pinged in, and of course he didn't risk his pension money, which that would never have happened. And so, reeling from all the excitement and venture, I booked myself onto a flight in Venice, and the next morning I found myself on the Rialto Bridge at 5 o'clock in the morning as an extra on the film set. Now, based on that, a few years later I was approached for this venture. The myth I want to bust here is that entrepreneurs are so positive and enthusiastic, they never listen to naysayers and never let themselves get sort of dragged down by that. I think that's wrong. In fact, I would say that as an entrepreneur, it's your job to seek out naysayers, because they're the people who really, really know what they're talking about, and they've got their feet on the ground. And the last thing you want to do is to start a business which is a rubbish idea. So get as much back as you possibly can from these naysayers about whether or not it's a good idea. And I've been involved in a lot of businesses, but there's a lot more businesses which have failed before they started. My hard disk is full of what I thought were great business ideas until I really tested them out. So they actually are your angels. But the other thing a naysayer lets you do is it lets you test the idea and actually work out what's wrong with it if it's not one of those failing ideas, and fix it. And then if you stop fixing it and naysayers still keep on going, then you reach that stage of confidence because you realize what they're saying to you isn't necessarily the case. So in this case, I was approached by 2 brilliant individuals who wanted to start a business or make a show about Peter Pan and set it in Kensington Gardens, which is where Peter Pan was originally thought of. But it wasn't any old Peter Pan show, and they wanted to put it on in a tent. It wasn't any old Peter Pan show, and it wasn't any old tent. What they wanted to do was make the world's tallest touring structure. Of course, this is when it's built rather than the twinkle in their eye. They wanted to make the world's tallest structure, and as you can see, all the poles are on the outside of the tent, and that means you can hang a 1,500 seat theatre from the poles, and you create an extraordinary theatre environment. And even more important than that, there's no restrictions, there's no sight line or any obstacles in the way, and that means that you can project right the way around the audience's head. So for the first time in history, the idea was to create a show where rather than the audience, like you are, sitting, looking down onto actors, moving around with staging in the background, actually what the idea was to put the audience inside the same world that the actors were in. And I just thought it was a magnificent idea. Again, there were problems. So one of the problems was that the Kensington Gardens is this fantastic royal gardens, and they made a condition that the show had to start on the 26th of May 2009, and this was at the very end of 2008. The next problem was that we needed to raise €3 million to make that happen, and we had 3 months to do it in. Now, when they approached me, they'd raised €100,000 in 2 years. It's obviously all in pounds, but I'm doing my best to translate into euros for you. And of course, the third problem was, as we all know, at the end of 2008, the world fell off the edge of a cliff. There was a whole load of events which led up to Lehman Brothers collapsing. If you were in any way aware or affected by Bernie Madoff scandal, Icelandic bank collapsed. Nobody really knew which way to turn. People were losing their money in banks. And so basically investors' wallets were shut. It was the worst financial market since the depression of the 1930s, and yet we had 3 months to raise €3 million, otherwise the business was off. So we basically need to enroll ourselves in our own masterclass about how to do this very accurately and very quickly. So I just want to share a couple of bullet points with you, because if this is a kind of stake you're at, which you're considering starting, and you're at that point where you've decided to start and you need to accurately focus on what you need to do next, then here's what we did, and this is personally what I'd recommend. The first thing you need to do is you need to isolate your core assumptions. Now, every assumption that runs your business is important, but it's the ones that are the big humdingers that is going to make a difference between success and failure. So in our case, I was looking at how much we could charge for tickets, how many people we thought it was realistic to expect would come and see the show, how much it would cost to build a tent, how much it would cost to start the show, and how much our running costs were. And there was a separate thing I was interested in, which is whether I thought the show was going to be any good, clearly. Now, you need to, and certainly what I did, is you need to test those core assumptions properly. There's absolutely no point in going off and kidding yourself that you find data which supports what you want to find. You absolutely need to find proper objective data. You need to compare, for example, ticket prices with what the comparable ticket prices are in the West End. And don't compare it against massive, successful musicals which charge big money and have huge 2,000-seat audiences. Test it against the average and possibly slightly below the average. Because if you present this to an investor and you're trying to make it a bit sort of fast and loose, you might actually get sued, but also probably what will happen is your credibility will go straight out the window immediately and they won't believe you. Seek out the naysayers. What we did is, once I was sufficiently confident I thought the idea had legs, we went to some of the greatest showmen in the world, which we were fortunate enough to be able to find and sort of get to meet. And they liked the idea, but they were skeptical. The world was in a funny old place. And one of the things they were skeptical was that we could actually build the show as amazing as we thought this was going to be for the money. And it forced us to go back to every single line item in the budget and to check every single one. We went even to all the suppliers and we got fixed price quotes. So when we went back to other naysayers who said you can't do it for the money, something magical started happening to us, which is we realized, and certainly for me, who hadn't very much experience with shows, I realized that I knew more about how to run this show business than some of the best naysayers, or a naysayer, is somebody who says something can't be done. That some of the best people in the business, I actually knew more about how to run this business and what was making it ticking than they were. And that, I think, is a magic threshold that you step over. And then so as a result of that, you either decide, frankly, to dump the idea, you decide to fix it, or you actually confirm your belief. And at that point, you reach what I call a decision. And until then, I hadn't made that decision. Now, just before we carry on, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about decision. Because to me, if there's one thing only, there's a difference between success and failure in business. In fact, the only thing any of us ever need to know, I think, it's about the power of making decisions. And what I mean by that is not having a really strong intention. I mean, I've got loads of those strong intentions. I mean, I really intend to lose weight and become fit. I mean, I really do. And yet, at the end of the week, I find myself eating fish and chips. Right? It doesn't mean to say I don't really intend to do that, but that's a kind of a weaker version. What I'm talking about is, we have an expression in England which says, you have the faith which has the power to move mountains. I realise, obviously, that you're an incredibly amazing crowd, that you're all Estonians, and yet you speak English. So I'm going to tell you about the root of the English word, and hopefully it'll mean something to you. The root of the word is from Latin, which is decidere. It means literally side is like suicide, genocide, etc., to kill off. And de means the others. So the root of the word, to decide, comes from to kill off any other alternatives. Literally to kill off anything else, any other result. Nothing, at that point, gets in your way. There are no distractions, no looking at other interesting business opportunities, no replying to stray emails, no watching telly in the evening, no socializing, no even sort of hanging out with my wife and my child, if necessary, not, some self-imposed monk existence, but if necessary, that's what you do. You literally kill off anything else, even the idea that it won't work, so long as you've done your homework to know that that's true. And I liken it to a computer which has got a sort of a program which you hit go and it won't stop until it's completed it. So what I want to do is I want to share a quote which I find very moving, which I think encapsulates it beautifully. And it was from a guy called W.H. Murray, who was part of Edmund Hillary's Himalayan expedition in 1953, which was the first to conquer Everest. So I'd like to read it to you. And he says, in fact, I'm going to start slightly before this. He says, but when we said that nothing had been done, I was wrong in one important way. We had definitely committed ourselves, and so we were halfway out of our holes. We had paid for our ticket and booked the boat to Bombay. This may sound too simple, but is great in significance. Until one is committed, there is uncertainty, the chance to draw back, and always ineffectiveness. Concerning all acts of creation, there is one simple truth, the ignorance of which kills countless ideas and splendid plans. That, the moment you definitely commit yourself, then luck moves with you. All sorts of things occur to help one that would never otherwise have occurred. A whole stream of events comes from the decision, raising in one's favour all manner of unforeseen incidences and meetings and material assistance, which no man could have dreamt would have come his way. And I'm reminded of my deep respect for one of Goethe's couplets. Whatever you can do, or dream you can, begin it. Boldness has genius, power, and magic in it. And to me, that's the best encapsulation I can find of this state, which is you've done your homework and you've got a good reason to make that decision. That's the state to be in. So, back to the story. So we had got to that place of decision, but now we needed to very quickly take action. And so again, part two, there could be several hours of how to go about raising finance, but I'm going to really laser the bullet points. First off, you need to create a brilliant proposal. When I say proposal, I mean the document you hand over. There are a number of reasons for this. The first is that when you write something down, you have to focus and concentrate exactly what you mean by what you're doing. This is, I have to say, a lot to do with raising finance rather than yourself, if you don't need the money, but it's still probably a good idea to do it, to give yourself that level of focus. The second is that you'll probably speak to somebody on the phone for 5 minutes, and they'll probably say, oh, that sounds interesting, can you send me something? At that point, your proposal is the thing that does the talking, not you. You can't be in the room to answer their objections, and they'll have all sorts of objections you can't possibly imagine, so you've got to make sure that something lives and breathes from your proposal. And if you're if you're just doing a half-hearted job, you are not attributing the greatness to your idea. Your idea may be fantastic, but if it's hidden under a whole load of uninteresting stuff, it's not going to bounce out of them in the way that it needs to bounce out. And I get approached all the time, sometimes about twice a week. People approach me to ask me for some kind of help with their business or starting a business. And probably in the last 3 years, I've probably seen 2 proposals that I thought were really impressive. That's not to say that there's not lots of fantastic ideas in there, but that they hadn't done the right job in expressing them. One of the things is they often forget to actually sell what's in it for the investor. Because even though investors are interested in your idea, they're not as interested in your idea as you are. They're interested to know they put 50,000 euros in. What are they going to get out of it? When's it going to come back? How's it going to work? And they also want to know that you're sensible enough to have managed the risk. Because it's their money that you might be losing. Networking. I probably met with or presented to about 1,000 prospective investors before we raised our money. In fact, we raised our money from 68 separate investors. And the networking to find out who knows whom, to basically meet as many people who are probably the right kind of people as possible, going to angel investment events, anything you can find. And probably the most important thing I think about networking for investment is that when you find your first investor, something magical happens, which is they are wealthy people, and they're going to be existing in a milieu of other wealthy people. They'll have friends who could possibly invest too. And what's more, they are going to be really enthusiastic about your idea, and so they're probably going to talk about it over coffee and all sorts of things with their friends. But it may not even occur to them to ask their friends to invest too. And you get really close to this person, if it's appropriate, of course, and you ask them to start introducing you to their friends. And before you know it, bit by bit, you build up a network of people who will want to invest. Get a high-powered non-executive director. 2 reasons for this. First is you really want somebody who's going to help steer you really well. And so somebody who's got experience in your sector would be useful. The second reason is that you want the credibility. You may be a great person, but they're kind of wondering whether, an investor may wonder whether you've kind of quite got what it takes. Whereas if you've got a high-powered non-executive director, like a non-executive chairman or something like that, then these are the kind of people who will mean something to an investor and possibly even know other investors, especially if they invest themselves. What happens is you have your plan A, which is what you've got in your proposal. And we all know that life never works out that way. And by the time you work out how to make your business work, you'll probably be on plan C or D or E. And therefore, the investor's not really necessarily investing in this exact idea as you expressed it, but they're investing in the team. So that's really important to make sure that you've got that sorted. And then finally, yes, you have to kiss many toes to find your handsome prince, but kiss them again and again and again. Find a reason to keep going back to them. Now, obviously, they say no, and you know that's a no, that's a different matter. But lots of people are going, well, no, I don't think so. And one of the things that happened to us is that when our chairman came on board from 360, we first of all asked him to invest. And his first thing he said to me is, I don't have any money at the moment. It was the beginning of 2009, and everybody felt the same way. And eventually, every time there's some news, I would do a round-robin email, I'd send people information. And he called me up and said, you know what, I think I might be interested in investing in becoming your chairman. And I looked up on my contacts database how many times I contacted him. And I contacted him 21 times, not hopefully hassling him, but just interesting, exciting news, 21 times before he picked up the phone and called me. And imagining that interacting with 1,000 investors, you imagine that we had a short period of time to do it in, so that was an awful lot of work. And often, when people were in bed in London, I was still up talking to people in LA and Australia. What was the result? We managed just in time to raise all the investment. And in fact, I'm glad to say we had a queue of people who actually wanted to invest after the investment round was closed. We launched on time. We had a fantastic Royal Gala opening with Prince Charles. And that show was, I think, about the second most successful show in London that summer. It went on to the O2 in London, and then it toured the US. And we then started a second show, which is Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, last year in Kensington Gardens. And the business, I think, probably got to about 50 million euro turnover in 2.5 years from a standing start. And I want to show you a little video sequence, which is a promotion video for when it went to San Francisco. But before I do, I want you to bear in mind that exactly a year earlier, or thereabouts, a year before this video was made, there was absolutely nothing. The only thing we had was an idea, a telephone, and a computer. There was nothing that we had that was any different from what anybody in this room had. So we just watched a little bit of video. And it's a slightly long video, so about 2 minutes through, we're just going to cut to the end.
This tie will not die!
Oh dear.
The gentleman's name was Mr. Darling.
You and I will starve, and we'll have to sell the children.
Us?
Yes, you, all of you.
These 3 children had a nurse called Nana.
Good girl. Come to Dada. Oh, the swishes. Oh, the gorgeous, scrumptious puppy.
But Mr. Darling was angry with Nana the nurse.
Strikes me sometimes, Mary, that it is a mistake to have a dog for a nanny.
So the children flew away. They flew all the way to Neverland, where the Lost Boys live.
Special effects are awesome. Flying over the city of London was fabulous.
It looks like you're flying too.
And the fact that it's circular, so you can look back and you've still got visuals behind you. Yeah, it's really cool.
Magical, like from beginning to end, and it makes you like want to be a child and want to fly.
Graphics amazing, acting is brilliant, something for the kids. Crocodile's just fantastic.
It's a crocodile, Captain! That's the one that ate your hand!
Great. So, that was me being inspired by somebody else's idea. I can tell you how brilliant I think it was, because I didn't do any of that. I was just recruited to the cause. So, my next business, or not my next one, but another one. Now, this was completely opposite. This was a business, what I might call a pop-up business. It started and ended in one day. And this is about busting a myth that you need to be experienced in the industry you're going into. So you may remember, I think it was 2010, was it, when there was an Icelandic ice cloud? There's an Icelandic ash cloud that spewed all the way across Europe, and all these planes were forced to land, and hundreds of thousands of people were in places they shouldn't have been. And certainly in Britain, what happened is there was a national thing to dispatch buses and coaches all around Europe to try and pick them all up. Now, it just so happened at the time, I was thinking about buying a failing bus company. Now, by the way, this is just pictures of lots of buses, just for legal reasons. This is not the company, it's just just buses. And I was thinking about buying this distressed business, and this is one way, by the way, to start a company. And if you want to know how to buy a company for €1, come and speak to me at some stage, and I'll be happy to explain how to do it. Now, one of my colleagues went to visit them, and at the end of the day, wrote me an email and said at the end of that, oh, by the way, they've got 15 coaches in their sheds, ? No wonder they're going out of business. And I was kind of intrigued by this, so I called up the owner of this business and said, I don't know whether I want to buy it, but I wouldn't mind renting these coaches off you. He said to me, oh, it's an awful lot harder than you might imagine to get coaches on the road at short notice like this. And I kind of heard what he was saying. Clearly, he was one of these experts, but I couldn't let it go, actually, a bit like a dog with a slipper. So I thought I'd try something out. I had some kind of connections with the tourism through my Venice business, so they weren't necessarily British tourism business, but I thought I'd put it out there, and I made a bold claim. And actually, I think that one of the jobs we have as an entrepreneur is, it's not bullshit, but it's what I might call winding your watch forward a period of time and telling a story from where you are, and then it being close enough to reality that people step over that line to believe you. And I said, I can get 15 coaches anywhere in Europe in half a day. I thought I'd try it out, because I knew that lots of people were desperate for coaches. And sure enough, 7 o'clock the next morning, I got a phone call from one of the tour operators who said, okay, come on, help us out. And at 7 o'clock that morning until 7 o'clock the next morning, I'd sold 40,000 euros worth of coach trips and made about 17,000 euros profit. And actually, that's probably, that little 24 hours is probably the thing that I was probably most proud of. And actually, the funny thing is that what I did was just so ridiculously simple. There was no magic behind it at all. And in fact, the guy who had those coaches, I probably only rented 5 coaches off him, and I had to find a way to get coaches out of the industry that the big boys hadn't found. And again, the idea, how I did it was just so madly simple that it's kind of embarrassing, really. But that happened. But so the question is, what was going on? And I think that, to me, what was going on was the second only to what I call master techniques. Basically, let me, so I get the slide. It's what I call where you look is where you go. Now, I think that what you see depends on what you believe. Right? And whether we know it or not, we have filters which filter out most of the information available to us, and we just see a tiny subsection of that information. And there's a bit of science behind this. We have a very ancient part of our brain called the reticular activating system, which is this filtering mechanism. And let's do a quick experiment. So what I want you to do, I'll give you 20, 30 seconds. I want you now to look around the room and there's a little bit of competition. I want you to spot as many red things or orangey red things as you can possibly see. Okay, go. Keep looking, and stop. Right, I want you all to close your eyes. Now I want you to think about all the blue things you saw in the room. Right, there you go. Open your eyes. What was really interesting is something inside you forgot to look at anything else other than the thing that you thought you were looking at. And I find that absolutely fascinating. And it's a survival mechanism, because clearly if a saber-toothed tiger's sort of pouncing at you, you're not going to go, oh, look at that blade of grass over there, it's rustling in the wind. You have to filter out the things which you think are most important. But we actually do this unconsciously. And we do it all the time. And so we don't even notice what's in front of us. We only just see a tiny subset. And so what I'm saying is that we can simply become conscious about that, and we can decide to kind of manually take control of those filters and use a technique that I call reframing. So, I mean, one technique, a very simple one, is you raise 10,000 euros out of 100,000 you need, and you go, oh, I've only raised 10,000 euros. You go, do you know, we've already raised 10,000 euros. And I know that it sounds a bit sort of simplistic, but that's a simple way of saying exactly the same thing. So we each have a different interpretation of what we look at, and some of them are useful and some of them not. And we end up going in a different direction based on what we see, based on the interpretation that sometimes we unconsciously, and now I'm suggesting we consciously make. Now this guy owned 15 coaches, I only got wind of this whole idea at the end of the ash cloud crisis, and I had to rent the coach of somebody else. I believe that he had that idea at the beginning, and it wasn't a brilliant idea. It was just, there are all these people who need coaches. I think he could have probably made €250,000, probably more, profit, not just turnover, profit. And what I was looking at hundreds of thousands of stuck people and 15 coaches. But what he was looking at was how hard it was. And in fact, he was concentrating so hard on going out of business that that's what happened. So I don't think it's about necessarily being experienced in industry. I think it's about bringing the right attitude and see the world as a place of opportunities. The next myth I want to bust is that entrepreneurs are risk takers. Now, I'm not going to talk about this business in any great detail, but this was a business where I sort of noticed it. This was my second business I ran at university, where we took on a venue in Edinburgh and for what in those days would be about €60,000 as students who didn't have any money. And we played about 300 shows in 3 weeks. They weren't our shows, but we sublet the venue and also put on a virtuoso violinist. And what I think is that it's the job of an entrepreneur to look at all the risks and to manage those risks away. It's a universal truism that the reason that businesses fail, the only reason a business fails, is it runs out of money. So I can't imagine what people will be doing, risking the money that's the lifeblood of a business. Right? And you may want to talk about business not being the thing that you're doing or thinking about doing, but you as the thing which is the business entity. And the only thing you've got to do is to try and work out how to make it work. And the only way you're going to do that is to make sure that you're still standing to fight another day. When you look at entrepreneurs, they look like what they're doing is taking risks, but if you actually find out what they're doing, you'll discover that actually they've found ways to make sure that this is much less risky than it would otherwise appear if you didn't really understand what they were looking at. And finally, the final myth I want to bust is entrepreneurs launch into booming markets. I don't think there's any bad time to start a business. I just think you need to tune your business to what the market condition is. And actually, I personally think that recessions are probably the best time to start a business. And I do realize that Estonia is leading Europe out of a recession, but I still think we're in this sort of uncertain time, and I think it's relevant to where we are and also relevant to the smallness of new businesses. And I think there are three reasons why a recession is a good time to start a business. The first reason is recessions just shake the market up completely and reinvent the rules. And one of the rules is that companies can spend a certain amount of money on things they've been used to spending them on. And actually, what you may well find is that those companies no longer had the money they thought they had. And when you're reinventing the rules, all these established businesses have a hell of a time keeping up. You've got egos involved about not really recognizing that the market's changed, politics, you've got staff that you may have emotional issues about getting rid of, or legal issues. You got rid of them, and then you've got a building which you're renting for 5 years. So there's all sorts of things that make it really hard for big businesses to adapt to that. Whereas if you're starting a new business in that market, you simply start your business based on the conditions that you see as you're starting. The second reason is that a lot of companies, the second reason I think is that it forces discipline. This is a business that I started about just over a year ago with a couple of other friends, and it's still in the crucible. We'll find out what happens to it. But it's an e-government solution. The National Health Service needs to now appraise 1 million health workers every year, and they've got one hell of a job on their hands to manage all that information. So we've made an e-government solution to help them manage all of that. And I would never have dreamt that large organisations like the NHS would have considered companies like ours, but one of our strategies was to be able to sell it very cheaply. And how could we do that? Well, it's because there's only 3 of us. We spend no money on just about anything. We don't have an office because home working is so easy these days. We don't even have business cards. The only thing we spend money on is to build a product. We don't even spend money on sales because we're the salespeople. And so we're incredibly lean. And what that means is that the NHS can't afford, and other organisations, big organisations you might be selling to, cannot any longer afford, possibly even by legislation, not to look at your solution. The other thing, of course, is that when you sell that solution, you probably sell it at a price cheaper than your large competitor can afford to sell it for if they're not to go bust. And of course, because you've got such low overheads, you can do that and make a really big profit. So our strategy was to launch a product which is good enough but cheap. And what I hadn't really realized at the time was that we just thought there were all these really big competitors who had been established, spent a lot of money on their products, and we weren't expecting to be a better product. But it turns out that part of what makes sort of a company bloated is also part of what makes a software system bloated. And we have recently started to discover, completely by accident, I think there are all sorts of benefits and advantages you can gain from starting in a recessed market, because you're going to be lean and fit in a way that other businesses that are existing today are not. So I'd like to leave you with a quote. Actually, let me just grab that if I can. I'd like to leave you with a quote, or two quotes, in fact. One is, set a goal to become a millionaire, not for the money, but for what it makes of you to achieve it. And the second quote from a guy, an amazing inventor of all sorts of things. And he said, what this power is, I cannot say. All I know is that it exists, and it becomes available only when a man is in a state of mind in which he knows exactly what he wants, and he is fully determined not to stop until he finds it. Oita tela.
Thank you. Any questions from the audience, please? Okay, before I think, was there?
I thought it was a okay, well...
So the question was that what the power is, what the Bell was hinting on.
Well, it refers back to what I think, which is this thing called a decision. That for me, there's a point where I say, listen, I don't know how to do it, but I'm now not going to stop until I find out. And you're on a mission. I mean, I'm sure we've all experienced people who've been on a mission, and you know you've got to move aside, you've got to get out of their way, because there's something in them, which is, it's not because of who they are, it's because of the mission they're on. Because you got into that amazing state of mind where you decided that it was going to happen. So that's the power I'm talking about.
Where goes this... the line you mentioned, that from interest to passion, that you make the decision, that you probably also, you mentioned that your hard drive is full of perfect business ideas, and only few of them got you excited enough that you actually follow them. What makes you tick, or how do you decide that, okay, this is beyond pure interest, it's something I'm going there and I'm following?
Good. Well, look, it's interesting, because I think there's a lot of language around passion, and I've entered into it, and I know a lot of people around me who enter into this. They sound incredibly inspired and energetic about what, the thing that they're doing. And it's important for us to distinguish, certainly inside of us, the difference between that kind of beer talk, bravura language, and actually something which is probably an awful lot calmer inside of us. And for me, I don't often get to that place, is the honest truth. And I'm only just, after a year, getting to that place with this last business I'm talking about, because what I've done is I've gone off and tested. I've gone off and looked around. And I've got some feedback back. In fact, the truth is that the biggest, in this last business, the biggest single company out there that we thought was the one that we can never beat, one of the hospital NHS trusts has asked us to remove that, even though they're paying for it still, they've asked us to remove it and replace it with ours. And that's the kind of data that comes back to this, wow, actually I think we might be onto something here. I actually get approached all the time by people with business ideas, and the most important thing to do is to work out whether they're nutty or whether they're serious. And I think, for me, the most important thing is to work out whether I'm nutty or serious, because I don't like risking my money or my time. And so what happens is I've got a really, really, really good reason to believe in something. And that's when I step over, and it doesn't happen like that, but it does happen over a quick period once the evidence starts coming in. So that's the difference between, yeah, I'm pretty enthusiastic about it, to going, right, I'm going to stop at nothing to make this work because it's brilliant.
You also mentioned that plan A always fails. It has to be a plan C, D, or X or W. What makes you to overcome the stress of like failing or getting no all the time? It has to be stressful.
Yeah, it is. Look, you know, of course, what I've done is I spent 45 minutes telling you about sort of 6 of the businesses I've been involved in and some extraordinary success story, but all of them had massive failures along the way, and I've had failures in businesses, all sorts of things. And I can't tell you that it's some amazing sort of dream and you sort of float along and it's all brilliant. You know, the thing about when you hear somebody's story is, you know, you wind forward a year and you go, oh yes, and of course, the business started or it did all these amazing things. What I think is that I had to be careful for what I wish for, because if I'm not careful, then I end up going on this conveyor belt that I never really meant to go on. And yeah.
Okay.
So I would like to ask, how do you keep yourself motivated? What keeps you ticking? Is there something special you're doing?
The answer is actually, no, I don't think so. And I probably, like every one of you in the room, times it goes. And actually, one of the things I've learned over just lots and lots of times is that I fall over, and I fall over a lot. And sometimes I think, oh God, this is all a complete waste of time, what am I doing? Then at some stage later on, whether it's half an hour or half a year, you pick yourself up. And if you do that enough, you do realise, or I realise with me, that I pick myself up always one more time than I fall down. And I think the important thing is if you've decided what you want to do and you know, you've done your research, you know it's a good enough idea, then you're on that conveyor belt and you fall over, you pick yourself up, you fall over, you pick yourself up, and you look back after a period of time and you go, wow, actually I've come quite a long way. And that for me is what happens. And I'm afraid there isn't any kind of magic thing where you get up in the morning and you're all kind of happy and excited every morning. But if you put yourself on that conveyor belt, having chosen wisely, and it really chosen wisely, and you really do believe in it, then what will happen is, you know, you'll start to get there. That's my experience anyway.
Okay.
Thanks very much for the inspiring presentation, but it seems the experience you talked about was somewhat ready-made. There was a word I didn't hear.
So? It
was somewhat ready-made. There was a word I did not hear, which was the value of mentors in your own experience. Maybe you could say a few words about that.
The value of mentors?
Yeah, if you had mentors yourself that helped you.
Well, I guess yes and no. What I'd say is, actually I have a business coach right now who is absolutely magnificent. So if you're watching Marianne, top banana. But that, I think, that's slightly different from a mentor. Well, possibly different from a mentor. You know, there are people who really understand people so well that, you know, it's like an angel. Mentors, for example, when I raised the money for the Venice show, I didn't know what I was doing, and I found a really, really nice guy who was incredibly experienced, John Sanderson, if you're listening, thank you. He was like a mentor because he understood what to do and I didn't, and he was kind enough to share his thoughts and his ideas with me. And I try and be in business with people who mentor me. So I think, I don't know if that answers your question. I mean, listen, I'm just no different from anyone in this room. The only thing is I'm careful about what idea I get caught with, and then I get caught by the idea, and I try and work out how to make it happen. That's it. And mentors are everybody around me.
You talked a little about making a good choice. Do you have any tips or tricks? You know, you get these times when you have to make a choice and you have to make it quick. How do you do it?
Yeah. I think sometimes it's really straightforward and easy, and sometimes it isn't, frankly. Can you say a little bit more about an example so I can sort of understand it?
Get the point, you know, like being on a conveyor belt. You know, you get quite a long way, and you don't even realize how you got there.
Yes.
So you have a package of experience behind you, but then you come to a point where you have to make a choice. Go this way and limit that, or going that way and limit this.
Oh, so it's a choice about, it's not about choice whether you want to do it, but a choice about doing, having started, you just don't know whether to do this or this next. It's difficult to tell. I mean, sometimes I just talk out loud to myself and I go, right, there are three things that can happen. Either I can stop doing this, I can do a little bit of A and most of B, or I can, and I just sort of lay them out in my mind and I go, what do I think? And then I guess ultimately, if the choice is so hard to make between A and B or D, E and F, eventually you've got to make one choice, and making a choice is probably better than doing nothing. And there's another truism expression, which is doing does it. And actually, I've often tried to do things perfectly, and what I realize is actually if I do something, I work out why that's wrong, and then stop and then do something else.
So the basic concept of pros and cons.
Yeah, and then eventually you probably still go, oh, what do I do? And then just make a decision. And then just know that it may not be the right decision, but it's probably better to make it and work out quickly that it was wrong than to worry about whether you made a decision. I mean, listen, what you teach best, you probably need to learn most yourself. So, I'm not a guru. I'm not a guru anyway. I'm not a guru about anything, but, I'm just sharing some of my experiences. So.
There's one great tip from entrepreneurs at what to do if you have two choices. You flip a coin, and if a coin goes right, you feel right, then do it. If a coin says go to A, and you feel that you should actually go to B, then go to B. That flipping a coin makes you to decide. That until you flip a coin, you never decide. So, might work. All right.
Yes. Thanks for a super talk. One question is, it's about the incredibly lean you mentioned. Like
I'm sorry?
Lean.
Lean,
yes. So, what I see, I'm just giving my experience, like I'm coming from the sales background, and I believe I have great things that I can take it forward. I usually end up people saying that, oh, why don't you build it? And usually there's either I should go to finance or I need some believers. So, and I'm preferring believers. Believers, like who believe in an idea and jump in as a dream team.
Yeah.
Yeah. So looks like I have already spent a few months. Would you? Well, should I stop? Yeah, I'm a bit of puzzle right now.
Do you know?
So should I still continue pursue, looking for the teams?
I think it'd be really irresponsible for me to say one thing or the other, because actually I just don't know. But I'm very happy to talk with you about it, and if I've got anything which may be of value, fine. And if not, then you can sort of ignore what I've said. But I don't know enough about your circumstance to give you any answer that's going to be valuable here. But I'm very happy to have a chat with you and just say what I think for what it's worth, and you can decide whether you want to listen to it.
Okay, let's take one last question. Which one?
Thank you for a very nice presentation, Colin.
Thank you.
As I'm a trainer of entrepreneurs for the last 20 years, I have a very important question for you. And I think my question is that have you never had this temptation to stay in this, for instance, the sexy business of filming in Venice, or when you just get to know it and you feel that, oh yes, that's great.
Yeah.
And how have you divorced yourself from just chosen the next path?
Do you know, I don't know. I think I'm quite different from most people. I mean, the number of times I've heard...
Be.
Yeah. I guess everybody's different, really. I hear lots and lots when I hear entrepreneurs talk about they've given birth to their baby, and that's great. I don't know. I mean, I guess how about this? When somebody's moved into a new house and it's completely derelict, and I say, oh, let me have a look. And they go, no, come look at it when it's finished. And I'm okay. Well, I'd like to see your house when it's finished, but I want to see what you're thinking about doing with it. And so I guess I just get my energy and my enthusiasm from what something could be, as opposed to what it is. And also, even though I really love people, I'm actually not fantastic at managing them. And so by the time that you kind of get out of the starting gates and all that kind of stuff, it's more about the day-to-day type of thing. And it's just not where my passion is and what I'm interested in. And then I meet somebody new with a brilliant idea, or somebody approaches me and I go, wow, that sounds great. And many times I kind of wish I, just carried on sticking with the business because it's an easier part of the journey. And I have, by the way. I mean, I've mentioned 6, but I've been involved in 10 plus businesses. Some of them I stayed for 4 or 5 years, by the way. I'm far younger than I'm far older than I look. So, it changes, basically. And sometimes people just ask me to help them start a business. So it's different situations.
So you have the character of a revolutionary person. You like the revolution, but not the kind of the steady time.
I kind of like the whole steady thing. But I don't know, I just, each time some fantastic idea sort of comes and I get enthusiastic, I guess.
Thank you very much.
Sorry, can I say that I also have shares in these businesses, so it's not like I divorced myself entirely.
Great, thank you for having you here.
Pleasure.
And there's a small traveling game that there are other interesting places in addition to Tartu in Europe. So here's a